Thanks for stopping by. This is Ars Poetic and I'm just a dude who really loves to play video games. Timestamps are in the video timeline and description if you want to skip ahead and just get straight into it. Ghost of Tsushima is an open-world, third-person action-adventure game based on the real-life Mongol invasion of Japan's island of Tsushima in 1274. The developers at Sucker Punch have put their spin on this historical event by crafting a unique experience with a compelling narrative and a strong cast of characters. Starting with a head-on confrontation with the Mongols, you play as Jin Sakai, a noble samurai taken under the wing of his uncle Lord Shimura. After an intense battle occurs, you are saved from the brink of death by a skilled thief named Yuna. With your uncle now captured by the Mongol leader Khotan Khan and the island of Tsushima under siege, your journey as Jin begins with figuring out how to rescue your uncle and fight back against the opposing Mongol forces. Initially released for PlayStation 4 consoles on July 17, 2020, since then Ghost of Tsushima has received some significant upgrades, including a multiplayer mode, a full-on PlayStation 5 upgrade, as well as an expansion with a new location, enemies, and story content, all of which is included in the director's cut of the game. This review covers the game up until version 2.10. Let's start by getting right into the gameplay and breaking down the details of what mechanics and elements come together to make this game what it is. The team at Sucker Punch knows exactly what they're doing here. Not only is the world riddled with various activities, enemies, and wildlife, but the aesthetics on display here are excellent. This island is a delight to explore. At times it feels like you're wandering through a Bob Ross painting, with different sections of the map having their own unique color palettes that jump out of the screen. You'll navigate through colorful forests, serene lakes, waterfalls, lush grasslands, snowy mountains, and flowery fields. Sometimes you'll be riding to an objective while the wind brings the surrounding nature to life, and you can't help but forget where you're going for a second as you appreciate the visual feast on display. The size of the game world is pretty substantial, especially once you uncover the whole map. It is initially split up into 3 sections, with the latter 2 inaccessible until you progress far enough into the story. There's a plethora of side activities, objectives, and tales that you can engage with to fill in your time between the main story missions. These activities all have their share of rewards and range from practicing your sword strikes and discovering shrines to composing haikus and exploring your thoughts in hot springs. You can summon your horse at any time by pressing left on the D-pad. This makes traveling around a breeze. In your travels, you'll occasionally see bright yellow birds flying around. They have a distinct chirp that you'll come to recognize. If you decide to follow one, it will actually guide you to a nearby point of interest. If you come across a fox and decide to follow it, it will lead you to a nearby Inari shrine. This brings me to one of the great features they implemented into this game. They eliminate navigational HUD clutter by using animals and the wind to guide you. For instance, if you place a marker on the map or have an objective that you need to reach, the wind will actually flow in that direction. If you swipe up on the touchpad, you can summon a gust of wind that will emphasize the direction of airflow. This is much more immersive than simply using a mini-map or some sort of on-screen compass. This also allows you to appreciate the visuals that much more, since you're not switching your focus to blips and radars. With all of the various structures, mountains, and hills present, you'll get plenty of opportunities to soak in the gorgeous vistas that serve as their own reward when scaling the environment. With that said, let's hop over to the platforming. There are a boatload of areas to climb throughout the natural landscape, not to mention tons of climbing and parkouring to do when you're making your way through man-made structures. It's a simple mechanic that I find fun to use when it is present. One place the platforming really shines is during the stealth scenarios. When you are infiltrating an enemy outpost, you can use the structures to your advantage. You climb atop rooftops and scale across tight ropes to survey the situation, taking down Mongols one by one as you disappear between kills. The stealth system is pretty typical in that there are certain types of tall grass you can blend in with or objects you can hide behind that will allow you to stay hidden. The closer and longer you are in an enemy's field of view, the higher your chances are of them being alerted. If one of them discovers you, the others will be quickly alerted and you'll find yourself in all-out combat. To help figure out where your enemies are, you can activate your focused hearing by pressing down on the touchpad. This will highlight nearby enemies within a short distance, even through walls, so you can more clearly see where they are and plan your moves accordingly. There is no way to move bodies, so if possible, you'll want to kill them in an area where they won't be discovered by another Mongol guard. There are a number of weapons and projectiles that you will obtain throughout the game, which can add a little variety to the way you use stealth. For example, you can distract Mongols with wind chimes and firecrackers, or you can strike some enemies down with arrows and poison darts. So what about regular combat? Well, we'll definitely get into that, but for now, let's start off with the standoff mechanic. When you encounter a group of enemies out in the open world, the game does an interesting thing here, often giving you the option to challenge enemies to a standoff. When you do this, you are essentially challenging an enemy to a duel. Both of you readying your weapons, taking your stances, and waiting for the right moment to strike. As you progress through the game and earn technique points, you will be able to spend them on upgrading this standoff, allowing you to take out multiple enemies as they rush in to strike you one by one. If you fail to time your strike just right, you'll take a near fatal blow and combat will begin. One of the first things you might notice during combat is the lack of a lock-on targeting system. What you have here is directional targeting, in that your attacks will land whichever direction you have your character facing. You will sort of automatically strafe and circle around the target you are focused on within a certain distance. I actually feel that this was the right decision to make. Most of the time you will be fighting multiple enemies, and so once you have the directional targeting down, I feel like it becomes much more fluid to slice up your foes and parry or dodge incoming attacks from all directions. However, with the recent Director's Cut upgrade, the Sucker Punch devs have added a lock-on targeting option in the menu. You can activate and deactivate this lock-on targeting by pressing up on the D-pad. To be honest, I spent some time messing around with this and I personally felt I was better off playing without it. That may be because I'm already used to the standard targeting system, but I really do think fighting groups of enemies is just better without lock-on. However, I do think it functions very well for one-on-one battles. I think it's awesome that they threw this feature in there post-launch, and I encourage people to experiment and find what makes the combat more fun for them. During combat, certain enemy attacks will have a blue or orange glint to them. Orange indicates an unblockable attack that you'll want to dodge, whereas a blue glint means that the attack is not only blockable, but that you can parry it. If you time it right and get a perfect parry, that'll make time slow down for a quick second, allowing you to get a good attack on the target. You could even dodge in place of parrying, and if done at the right time, you'll still get that slowdown effect while your opponent is wide open for an attack. Note that even regular attacks with no visible glint can still be parried with the same slow-mo effect, when timed correctly. There are 4 fighting stances you can use in the game, with each one being effective towards a particular enemy type. The default stance you will have from the beginning is the stone stance, which is perfect for swordsmen. The water stance is ideal for enemies that have shields, wind stance being great for polearm fighters, and the moon stance being what you want to use for those big heavy dudes. If you play with the default HUD, you'll notice that each enemy has a short meter above them, which is essentially a posture or a stagger meter. Your attacks will fill up this meter, and when full, it will break, staggering the enemy and stunning them for a couple of seconds. Correctly switching sword stances to counter enemy types will greatly increase the effectiveness of your stagger damage. You could disregard this and still land blows without staggering enemies or switching to appropriate stances, but this will make fighting groups much harder. These little golden orbs on the HUD above your health bar represent your resolve. You'll build these up through combat and can use them to heal yourself. The way they explain this mechanic in the lore is that you're using your resolve to fight through the pain, gaining a second wind of sorts. You can also combine your resolve and use them to perform a couple of special moves. In addition to your trusty katana, you will have a few other weapons at your disposal. These include bows and arrows, a blowgun, kunai, sticky bombs, smoke bombs, and incendiary oil. Your half bow can use either regular arrows or flaming arrows, while your long bow can be paired with heavy arrows or explosive arrows. There is a concentration mode that you can use with either bow, which will slow down time while you're aiming. I recommend unlocking and leveling that up early on as it makes using the bow much more effective in the middle of combat. These all can add a decent amount of variety to the combat and can even save your ass when you need to turn the tide of battle. One of my favorite parts of this game are the duels that take place. You could sort of look at these as boss fights. There are no ghost weapons or projectiles here, just raw 1v1 sword combat. These fights are nothing short of epic, often in distinct cinematic arenas with powerfully intense music. On that note, I wanted to briefly touch on the music. The entire soundtrack is amazing, but when you're in combat, it's on a whole nother level. Japanese instruments like the shakuhachi, biwa, shamisen, koto, and taiko drums all add the authentic vibes as they're mixed with compelling orchestral arrangements. These compositions were masterfully done. The new songs that the Iki Island expansion brought along are equally as amazing as the original selection. The soundtrack flows very well through the gameplay, always feeling like it's meant to be there. If you're into vinyl, this OST is a must-have.
What are you waiting for, boy?
Not waiting. Studying. Learning.
Let's switch gears back to the gameplay mechanics and talk about some of the RPG components. You can customize your gear, and what's cool is that each outfit will have a certain set of upgradable perks that will benefit certain stats or mechanics, also changing the appearance of the armor. For example, the fully upgraded Tadayori armor will increase the fire rate of your bows and duration of your concentration time, while also restoring 50% of that time with each headshot. This makes using bows incredibly more powerful. You can switch the appearance of each armor set as you'd like while maintaining your upgrade level. There are plenty of other armors, each with their own sets of perks, encouraging slightly different playstyles. Your hat, mask, sword kit, and horse saddle choices are all purely for aesthetics though. Still, there are plenty of cool options here. You'll unlock equipable charms throughout the game, and these charms will provide you with certain buffs or abilities that are very useful and can help you further focus on a particular playstyle. More charms were recently added that will actually weaken your stats and abilities, adding more of a challenge. So now you've got the breakdown on all of the main gameplay elements. Let's talk a bit more about what you can expect from the campaign and the Iki Island expansion. Like many games, the first couple of hours will be a bit linear as they teach you how to play the game through certain scenarios. It's like wearing a new pair of shoes for the first time. You might feel a bit restricted, but walk around with them enough and you'll stretch them out in due time. Just stick with the main quest for at least a couple of hours and the gameplay will start to open up. I admittedly wasn't quite sold on the feel of combat initially. Once I saw the depth that was there though, with the stances, abilities, and gadgets, and became more comfortable with the freeform targeting system, I was hooked. Your mileage might vary, but after about 8 or 9 hours, you'll probably get close to the Act 1 finale. This is where I went from hooked to in love with this game. There are significant story developments and epic moments to be had here. You will have gotten a solid vertical slice of what you can expect from the rest of your journey here. Just over a year after release, the recent Iki Island expansion was released on August 20th, 2021. This expansion adds a considerable amount of story and gameplay content to the game, which can be accessed at any time upon completing the first act of the game. After investigating a strange phenomenon of people who have seemingly lost their minds, Jin encounters the Mongols responsible and interrogates their shaman. Jin learns that they are with a group called the Eagle Tribe, who have invaded the island of Iki with plans for Tsushima next. Seeking to face the Eagle Tribe head-on, Jin travels to Iki Island and supports the local raiders in their fight to reclaim their island from the Mongols. The island of Iki is directly tied to significant events of Jin's past, further fleshing out his character and relationship with his father. This island brings new areas to explore, of course, and activities to complete. Nothing game-changing though. Archery challenges and animal sanctuaries are added, along with a tournament that you can participate in, fighting people one-on-one with wooden swords known as bokken. Otherwise, there's not much going on here that's different from Tsushima. What you're really here for is the additional story. When it comes to combat, you will notice that the Mongols here on Iki Island are much stronger than those already in Tsushima. Shamans will perform chants which empower their allies to attack you relentlessly. One thing I noticed here is that enemies will actually switch weapons pretty often, unlike the enemies on the main island. You'll be switching between your sword stances much more frequently to keep the pressure on your foes. Overall, the expansion is a welcome addition to the suite of upgrades Ghost of Tsushima has received post-launch. So what kind of time are you signing up for with this game? Well, I can tell you that I managed to complete the main story and a solid chunk of extra content, including all of the character side quests, at about 49 hours. I went on to obtain the Platinum Trophy for the game not too long after that. Don't just take my experience though. According to howlongtobeat.com, the main story takes about 24.5 hours, extra content will average you around 43, and a completionist run will be about 60. The Iki Island Expansion gave me about another 10 hours with the game. You may get anywhere from 5 to 15 depending on how much of the side activities you want to take on. Let's cover a few tips and recommendations here. These may or may not work well for you, but these are things that help me enjoy the game more. I typically play most games on normal difficulty, though there are some exceptions, this being one of them. I went with hard difficulty on this one. Even though some of the duels were incredibly difficult for me at first, they elevated the intensity in those moments and they became even more satisfying to beat. Overall, I felt that hard difficulty provided a solid but conquerable challenge for me. Luckily, you can change the difficulty at any time in the pause menu, so if you feel like you need more or less of a challenge, take some time to experiment. For you trophy hunters out there, no trophies are attached to any difficulty level. Don't try to rely too much on moving the camera in attempts to get your targets in front of you. As enemies surround and attack you, they will be all over the place, and I find it easier to just switch the direction of your attacks rather than focusing on your camera angle. Also, when you start an attack or series of attacks, you want to stick with that direction through the attack's completion. If you try to preemptively back away, you will change the direction of your attack and may inadvertently miss your target. Identify what enemies are causing you the most trouble and take them out first. I've been taken down more than a handful of times due to attacks from archers staggering me, leaving me vulnerable to brutes landing their unblockable attacks while I'm trying to fight off others. Getting rid of those two groups first allowed me to be more successful when taking on the rest. Sometimes I would use stealth to take down a couple of them first before going all out with the others. Keep practicing your parry and aim to hit that sweet slow-mo spot as much as you can. This allows you to take down enemies so much quicker with critical blows. If you find yourself getting overwhelmed by a crowding group of enemies, give yourself some distance and try to take them out one by one. In some cases, it might be better to just run away completely and come back later, or replan your attack. This can also be a useful tactic if you just want to move the battle to a more open area so you don't have to worry about objects and structures getting in the way of you or the camera. Definitely take some time to figure out what gear will aid you best or make the game more interesting. For instance, if you're dying way too often, equip some charms that will give you more health and reduce enemy damage. Wearing something like the Samurai Clan armor will also help you out a lot. I mostly focused on a ranged build myself, so that I could dispose of archers and weaker enemies from a distance, allowing me to have an easier time when face to face with other enemies. That said, I recommend that you don't get too stuck in a particular pattern of play. Try switching it up from time to time to keep things fresh. Keeping a healthy rotation of going headfirst against your enemies, performing stealth takedowns, and using ranged combat with your bow will spice up the gameplay. Try to refrain from looking at the map too much. As I mentioned earlier, you will discover a lot of things naturally. Don't be afraid to veer off the main path and follow a golden bird or scope out an area that catches your eye. The more you look at the map and set waypoints, the more you will feel like you're running through a checklist. Definitely give the game a chance to lead you to stuff naturally. Before we touch on the multiplayer content, let's go over some of the special features and post-launch upgrades. If you're familiar with the acclaimed Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, you'll know that he has made several samurai films with a particular style that is iconic. The Sucker Punch devs have thrown in a Kurosawa mode, which makes the game completely black and white, giving off that aesthetic feel of a Kurosawa film. This is an awesome feature and it looks great, but at the same time I feel like taking away the vivid colors this game offers is like eating ramen without the broth. The artistic vision is just so heightened by the use of color, especially when viewed on a nice display. The photo mode in this game is fantastic for those that enjoy that sort of thing. I've used it myself to create wallpapers and they look stunning. There are all sorts of modifications to be messed with here. Camera angles, color adjustments, wind speed, wind direction, weather, time of day, particle effects, etc. Check out the link in the description if you'd like to see all of the patch notes released thus far, courtesy of the Ghost of Tsushima wiki. Let's talk about the big details here. If you have the option, playing on the PS5 is the best way to play this game right now. You essentially get a locked 60 frames per second during high resolution mode, which is great. They had previously allowed this frame rate boost to 60 when playing the game in backwards compatibility mode back when the PS5 first came out. This was already awesome. However, the most recent official PS5 upgrade boosts up the resolution further, making the presentation look crisper. The official PS5 upgrade also brought along haptic feedback and trigger support for the DualSense controller. After having a PS5 for about a year now, I still find these implementations to be pretty cool and fun to feel. You'll feel Jin's heartbeat pulsating through your fingers when your health is low. You'll feel the melodies of the shakuhachi when played, and even your sword as you sheath and unsheath it. You will also hear your sword clashing with enemy weapons and shields through the controller speakers, paired with a subtle vibration feedback. During those intense sword-locking duel moments, these sensations are emphasized further. The haptic triggers come into play for the archery and some grappling hook mechanics. It's a nice touch. The game was already visually stunning, and this performance boost is sweet. Load times have also been reduced greatly. Not that they were that long before, but everything is basically instant now, and less time waiting is always welcome. If you want to get into even more details about quality and performance comparisons between the consoles, I recommend that you check out the most recent analysis made by the guys over at Digital Foundry. A link will be in the description for those interested. If they end up releasing a PC port in the future, I'm sure those guys will cover it as well. With New Game Plus, you'll be able to start a new game while getting to keep all of the skill, weapon, and cosmetic upgrades that you've obtained in your previous playthrough. This will actually skip over the setup that takes place during the first hour of the game and get you right into the open world with your horse. You'll also now be able to unlock 2 new armors in addition to several other cosmetics and charms. The lethal difficulty was added in patch 1.05, which heightens the intensity and swiftness of combat by increasing the lethality of sword strikes from enemies and yourself. After completing the game on hard mode, this is a nice feature to have. They also added a lower intensity combat option, making the combat much easier to play with increased time for reactions, less aggressive enemies, and stronger blocking mechanics for those of you that may not be skilled with action games. Replayable duels and Mongol territories are one of my favorite additions. One thing you may notice as your journey draws to an end is that combat encounters are less frequent and less fulfilling. This of course falls in line with the progress you make in taking the island back, but sort of leaves the world feeling a bit empty. Getting to retackle all of these encounters at any point in time makes it very convenient to relive those high intensity moments and dive right into some combat. In patch 2.0, additional controller options were added. While you could already customize PlayStation controller mappings to your heart's content in the system settings, it's always nice when you find a game that gives you the options so they actually update the button prompts and such. As a lefty with his own set of controls, I always welcome more controller options. I'm glad that they added alternate melee mappings which switch light and heavy sword attacks from square and triangle to R1 and R2, enabling better control of the analog sticks in combat. So now let's talk about the biggest addition to the game post-launch, aside from the Iki Island expansion, Ghost of Tsushima Legends, otherwise known as the multiplayer mode. In this mode, you are able to team up with other players online for some awesome co-op missions. The campaign of the main game is more or less grounded in realism when it comes to its storytelling and combat. However, in Legends, you're gonna see a lot of weird and supernatural shit here, which actually creates new, fun, and challenging gameplay. There are 4 main modes here: Story, Survival, Raids, and Rivals. Story mode offers a series of objective-based missions for up to 2 players. Each story typically spans 3 chapters. Each chapter will have you go through different areas and complete different objectives, which mostly come down to eliminating enemies. The catch here though is that these aren't ordinary enemies, and they may require specific tactics to defeat. In survival, you have to survive a certain amount of waves while also controlling key areas of the map. If enemies take control of a point, you cannot reclaim it for a couple of rounds, and your team's maximum health will be lowered. For me, this is my go-to multiplayer mode in Legends. Raids here are sort of like the endgame content. The scenarios play out like some of those in the Legends story mode, where there are certain objectives and methods you must use to defeat your enemies and move on, except here, you get to be in a group of 4. Rivals is the latest mode to hit this game. This game mode is a 2v2 competitive match to see who can defeat all waves of enemies fastest. Each team will have their own side of the map. You will gain Magatama as you defeat enemies, which can be used to make offerings that will harm your opponents. Each mode has a nightmare version that is updated weekly for higher level rewards. There are some fundamental differences in Legends which switch up some of the gameplay elements that you might be used to in the campaign. Let's start with the classes. The main difference here is that you can no longer be a skilled jack of all trades when it comes to playstyle. There are now 4 character classes to choose from. Each class has their own unique and ultimate ability that you can activate with Resolve. Class abilities can be periodically activated between cooldowns. There are also perks for each of the classes that buff certain abilities or characteristics of that class. While most can equip and use the same type of weapons and gear, some are tied to specific classes. The Samurai is the tank class, which focuses on dealing heavy damage. Their ultimate ability is Hachiman's Fury, which lets you lay down a quick succession of strikes on your foes. 2 of the class abilities focused on heavy damage, while one of them allows you to siphon health from your enemies. The perks focus on melee buffs and abilities, while certain samurai charms also increase various melee damage and health attributes. The Hunter is essentially a ranged class. While also adept with sword combat, the Hunter's true power lies in their various ranged abilities. The Eye of Uchitsune is the Hunter's ultimate ability, which allows you to instantly target multiple enemies for guaranteed headshots. 2 of the class abilities let you fire more powerful arrows, while the 3rd ability allows you to summon a Ghost Archer to help provide ranged attacks. The perks mostly focus on buffing range damage, ammo, and fire rates. While all classes can equip bows, only the Hunter can equip the long bows for increased damage and range. The Ronin class is a great support class. Their ultimate ability is Breath of Izanami, which will revive all downed allies no matter where they are on the map. Each Ronin class ability offers something different. The first will summon a spirit dog to aid you in combat. The second ability will allow you to heal allies when they are close to you, and the third will ignite enemies near you. While any class can use sticky bombs, only the Ronin can equip the bomb packs, which provide excellent crowd control. The assassin will perform quick and powerful assassinations on enemies and can utilize the Vanish ability, which is essentially an enhanced smoke bomb technique. Their ultimate is Shadow Strike, which renders you invisible and allows you to perform long-range melee attacks. The assassin's 3 class abilities are different variations of the Vanish technique. The first will make your smoke cloud poisonous to enemies, while the second will vanish allies within range along with you. The last smoke bomb ability will also heal you and your nearby allies. Only the assassin can equip the blowgun, which allows you to use those hallucination darts. There are no party requirements for specific classes, so you, your friends, and random players don't have to worry about not being able to play your desired class. However, I do recommend that you coordinate when possible, because each class certainly has their own strengths and abilities that provide a good balance for combat and teamwork. Gear functions very differently in Legends. Every weapon and item now has its own set of stats and abilities tied to it. with various degrees of rarities. The gear you equip will directly affect your overall power level. While every class has a katana, you no longer have access to all 4 stances like you do in the campaign mode. Here, each katana will have one stance by default, though if you're lucky, you can have a katana with the ability to switch to another stance. If you party up with your friends, you might want to make sure you have multiple katana stances in your group. That way, each of you can focus on specific enemy types for effective damage. What's cool about the gear having all these different stats and perks is that you can actually modify the individual elements of each weapon or reforge the item to get a whole new set of traits. This mitigates the grind for gear that is sometimes present in these types of systems. That covers all of the gear that actually affects gameplay. While everything else is only cosmetic, there are a ton of cool options here, including those from the main game. The armors and masks are actually unique to each class. They throw in some emotes and sword particle effects too. There are many challenges you can complete to gain these cosmetics, but that's pretty much it. What you're really here for is slicing up enemies with your buddies, and honestly, that's all it needed to be. While Rivals was a pretty cool recent addition, I would like to see other types of PvP modes, including 1v1 sword duels thrown into the mix, or even just more raids and survival maps. Something tells me they'll continue to add at least a couple more things to this game, so definitely take a look at the patch notes for the latest updates. That's it for my review. I really appreciate the time you spent listening to me ramble on about one of my favorite games from 2020. I absolutely love this game and what it has to offer. If you made it this far, please let me know what you liked or disliked about my review. Were there parts that you felt I could have shortened or parts you wished I expanded upon? Did you feel I covered all of the information you would have liked to know? What was your favorite part of my review? Least favorite? Thank you to everyone who joined in on my game streams as I played through the entirety of this game and the Iki Island expansion. Special shout out to Phantom, who also helped me record some of the multiplayer content for this video. If you're curious about my streaming content, check me out on Twitch and my other YouTube channel where I also stream. Going forward, I will continue to experiment with game reviews along with other types of content. Thanks again for your time. Peace out for now. Catch you on the next one.